All right, let's get into it. Today, we're going to crack open the engine block and take a really close look at a part that's, pretty small and simple in theory, but is absolutely essential to how our world moves. We are talking about the engine's hidden heart, the piston. So, think about it for a second. When you picture a car, a massive ship, or even a simple generator, what's that one component, the one you never see, that's doing all the real work? Yup, you got it. It's the piston. The best way to think about it is like the muscle inside the machine, just tirelessly turning these tiny explosions of energy into actual useful motion. So what exactly is a piston? Well, at its most basic, it's a moving part that's sealed up tight inside a cylinder. Its entire job, its whole reason for being, is to take the incredible force from an expanding gas, from fuel igniting, and transfer that push to a crankshaft. It literally turns that straight-line force into the spinning motion that makes everything go. It's the ultimate translator of pressure into power. But to really get why this is so cool, we have to look a little closer. So let's break down the anatomy of a piston. Every single piece of this thing has a vital role. Up top, you've got the crown. That's the face that takes the full, brutal force of the combustion. Then you have the rings, which are so important. They create this gas-tight seal to trap all that power, but they also manage the oil on the cylinder wall. The main body is called the skirt, and it's what keeps the piston moving straight and true. And finally, there's the Gudgeon pin, which a lot of people call the wrist pin, and that's a perfect name, because it acts just like your wrist, creating the pivot that links the piston to the connecting rod. Okay. But here's where it gets really, really interesting. Not all engines are created equal, right? So that means you can't just have one-size-fits-all pistons. Different engineering problems require totally different piston designs. So let's start with a big one. Think about modern high-powered diesel engines. The conditions inside those cylinders are just, well, they're insane. The challenge here is just pure survival. How insane? We're talking about pressures hitting 20 megapascals. Now, to put that into perspective, that is like balancing the weight of 2 whole cars on an area the size of a postage stamp. It's just immense. And it's not just the pressure. We're also talking about surface temperatures that can get over 450 degrees Celsius. That's easily hot enough to melt lead. So the big question is, how do you stop the piston itself from melting? The solution is actually a really clever piece of engineering. You cool it from the inside. There's an injector that's constantly spraying engine oil up into a special cooling channel built right inside the piston. As that oil rushes through, it pulls the intense heat away from the piston crown, carrying it safely away and keeping the whole thing from literally destroying itself. All right, on to the next challenge. What if your goal isn't just surviving, but pure speed and efficiency, like in a high-performance sports car engine? Well, this problem led engineers down 2 very different paths. On one hand, for heavy-duty engines, you have the trunk piston. It's long, it's heavy, and that's because its big skirt is needed to handle huge side forces. But all that weight makes it slow. For high-speed engines, you need something different. So they came up with the slipper piston. They basically chopped away every bit of the skirt that wasn't absolutely necessary, making it incredibly lightweight. And why does that matter? Because less mass is way easier to move back and forth, which lets the engine rev higher and faster and ultimately make more power. Now let's jump to the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Forget about high speeds. What about gigantic, slow-moving engines, like the kind you find in cargo ships? The forces in these things are just astronomical. For this, engineers came up with a really fascinating design called the crosshead piston. It's actually a 2-part system. You have the main piston up top, and its only job is to seal in the gas. That's it. All the sideways forces are handled by a totally separate guide piece, the crosshead, way down below. And the real genius of this is that it completely separates the blazing hot combustion area from all the critical moving parts. This keeps everything clean, perfectly lubricated, and makes the engine unbelievably durable. Okay, how about a totally different kind of puzzle? Let's talk about 2-stroke engines. In these engines, the fresh fuel mix is coming in at the exact same time the old exhaust is trying to get out. So how do you keep that fresh fuel from just taking a shortcut and flying straight out the exhaust port? For a long time, the answer was the deflector piston, and it's a beautifully simple idea. You just add a raised rib to the top of the piston. That little rib acts like a ramp, physically directing the fresh fuel upwards, forcing it to loop around inside the cylinder. This loop pushes out the old exhaust gases ahead of it, instead of letting the good fuel escape. A simple shape that solves a really complex problem. Of course, the shape is only half the battle. The materials pistons are made from have had to evolve like crazy too. The very first engines just used heavy, tough cast iron, but as performance went up, engineers needed lighter stuff that could still take the heat, which led to special aluminum alloys like Y alloy and hydronium. And today, the pistons in a top-level race engine are often forged or even carved out of a solid block, a billet, of advanced aluminum to get the absolute ultimate in strength while being as light as possible. But, this whole technology goes way, way beyond just cars and trucks. In fact, once you start looking for them, you realize pistons are basically everywhere. I mean, that same basic idea, a moving part inside a sealed cylinder. It's in everything from the very first steam engines to the massive hydraulic rams on construction equipment that can lift tons. They're inside the pumps that move our water and the compressors that fill our tires with air.
And here's a perfect example of how form always follows function. Check out this quote about steam engines. Because steam pushes on both sides of the piston and there aren't many side forces, the piston can just be a simple, thin disc. It looks absolutely nothing like that lightweight slipper piston from a race car, but it's doing the same basic job, just perfectly adapted for its own world.
So after all these different designs and materials and innovations, what's the big takeaway? What's the piston's legacy? When you really step back and look at the big picture, something incredible becomes clear. For more than 200 years, from the very first steam locomotive to the fastest hypercar, the piston's core job hasn't changed one bit. It exists for one simple reason: to take invisible pressure and transform it into the powerful, tangible motion that literally built our modern world. And that kind of leaves us with one last big question. As we head into this new era of electric vehicles and different kinds of power sources, what's next for the piston? How is this simple yet endlessly clever component going to keep evolving to meet the challenges of tomorrow? Well, that's a question that engineers are trying to answer right now. Thanks for diving into this with me.